In this Nightreign video, we're going to be doing a little bit of a deep dive into the Nightfarers of Elden Ring Nightreign. I did a video on this kind of introducing people to it before we had any gameplay footage from the network test and before we had a HUD or anything like that. But in this video, I want to talk about my experience having played each of these characters. I completed a successful run on each of these characters, and I kind of want to go through what I like about these classes, what I don't like about them, and if there are any changes that I think need to be made for the full version of the game. Before I get into it though, I think the characters themselves, or the Nightfarers themselves, are probably the most interesting thing about Nightreign in my opinion. Each one plays differently if you're leaning into their class skills. They have different play styles. Obviously, what we learned from the network test was that each one of them actually does have strength, dexterity, intelligence, and faith, or some amount of it, and each weapon scales off that, so different weapons are going to perform better or worse with different Nightfarers. So even though each one can use all the weapons, there is a bit of a variance between the characters in terms of how effective those weapons are. I also think the combinations of different characters are one of the more fascinating things. We only have 4 in the network test, but when there's 8 at launch and then more to be added later, this is going to become particularly interesting, seeing the synergies between the characters, what works well together, what doesn't work as well. I think all that's, what really sets Nightreign apart from me from Elden Ring, besides the obvious gameplay loop. So let's start with Guardian first. Guardian is just tons of fun to play. He wouldn't have been my first choice, he wasn't my first choice of character, but nonetheless, I did manage to complete a successful run with him, and I found him really fun to play. Wings of Salvation is absolutely just a blast. Jumping up in the air, dive bombing groups of enemies like a missile, or bosses that are grouped together, while also being able to res party members easily. I saved the day in a couple runs with reses. I made short work of lots of enemy encampments and bosses. It's just a really, really fun character, way more fun than I think most people realize. I would say, though, that Guardian is a very difficult class to play if you're trying to actually tank with it. Like, if you just grab its two-handed weapon and go ham, it's super easy to play and fun. But trying to actually make use of your Great Shield and make use of Steel Guard, getting into that kind of slower movement stance and taking less stamina damage when you block. Very difficult to get aggro then do that, then get aggro then do that, because if like your team's all wailing on a boss and you're trying to tank it, you're not going to be able to hold aggro for long. I find Guardian to be the most effective when tanking when he's like holding one boss off to the side while your teammates are dealing with another boss or another set of bosses. That seems to be where he really shines. But he doesn't really tank like a single boss very, very effectively. Also, something I kind of find frustrating on Guardian is that there doesn't seem to be very good shield options for him. His original shield starts with 60 guard boost. Very rarely do you find a shield that has better guard boost than that. And even if you upgrade his starter shield, the guard boost doesn't improve. I would like to see that improve if you upgrade it, so you could at least be a little bit better at blocking if you upgrade the shield. But that is not currently the case. So it can be kind of difficult to try and play him as a tank if you're not able to get a better shield. And the last thing I'll say about Guardian is that his class skill Whirlwind, I feel like, is the least useful of all the class skills in the network test. Wylder has Claw Shot that can just pull him to bosses or pull enemies to him or slide all over the map. Duchess has Restage, which is the best out of all of them, repeating damage. And then Recluse has being able to pull FP out of enemies and do special like combinations of things, but those are all better than Whirlwind in my opinion. You can charge Whirlwind for a larger radius, and I highly recommend you do that, otherwise you end up trading damage a lot. But the poor damage that Whirlwind does and the kind of split-second knockdown is useful, but honestly, it's not as useful as the other ones, and I think maybe something needs to change with this class skill. Either it needs to deal more damage and have longer cooldown, or something where like it just makes sense to use it a lot more often. So next we're going to move on to Wylder, who, as I predicted, is the most popular character in the network test. I thought for sure he would be. His passive skill, Sixth Sense, that prevents one death is so good for new players that are learning the mechanics of Nightreign. And he's a very fun class to play and a very easy class to use. Claw Shot is just crazy fun. 6-7 second cooldown or something like that. Being able to slide all over, get back in melee range effectively is great. Because he has Claw Shot, his mobility isn't quite as good as Duchess, but it's better than the other 3 classes. So he's going to be able to move around the map more effectively, which is nice. And Onslaught Stake is probably the most generally useful ultimate in Nightreign currently, because you can lead off with it, and a lot of bosses will stance break, and everyone can just gang up on them while their stance broken. And, you know, Duchess can quickly use restage right afterward while this is happening, pound even more damage. You can usually burst down a lot of bosses with that combo between that stance break of Wylder and Duchess's restage. I think more often than not, you know, you're going to get something out of Wylder's ultimate ability. You can miss it. It's got a short range, but usually when you pull it off effectively, and if you have 2 Wylders that stack these on a boss, it can be really, really deadly. I managed to complete a run with Wylder. I played 2 completely different playstyles while playing him. I tried Sword and Board, and I also did dual Greatsword jump attack build, which was fun. And I don't think there's much I would change with Wylder right now. I feel like he's in a really good place. There isn't really a lot that needs to change with his class. Moving on to Duchess. Duchess is easily the strongest character in the network test in the right hands. But the downside of her is that she has a very low HP pool compared to both Wylder and Guardian, meaning that she can get killed really easily, particularly early on if you mistime a dodge, or maybe you play too aggressively with her attacks. While she's definitely the best character in terms of outright damage, if she's not played well, it can be absolutely useless on a team. Her mobility is top tier. She has the best mobility of any of the network test players, and I think skilled players that like that aggressive Bloodborne style will find her dodge right up her alley. And restage is the best class ability in the network test, allowing you to reapply damage quite frequently. I think this thing has like a 15 or 20 second cooldown. It's not very long. And I think this is predominantly the reason why Duchess might be the strongest DPS character as a whole, is because that skill alone, it doesn't rely on like getting a good weapon or something like that. Like Recluse is very dependent, in my opinion, on finding a good spell, and I think her damage can outperform Duchess when she gets one. But Duchess is always going to be able to use this ability from the get-go, which is why I think she has more consistently higher DPS than Recluse. Finale is also a phenomenal support skill that you're primarily going to use in boss fights to give players a second to breathe or to get reses off on down teammates. You can use it during exploration as needed as well to avoid like enemies shooting things at you or throwing things at you, or to slip by and backstab enemies. But not having a DPS ultimate might be Duchess's only weakness, in my opinion. That's the weakest thing about Duchess, that she doesn't have one. But if she had a DPS ultimate like Wylder did, for example, I think she would be the most favored class in the network test, hands down, because she's already like the highest damaging character on an average in the network test. If you then added a DPS ultimate to her, I think she'd be absolutely busted. So it's probably best that they don't change that. So I don't think there's really anything with Duchess that I would change as well. It's nice to have some higher skill ceiling, higher skill floor characters, and Duchess is definitely one of those. And lastly, we come to Recluse, who is the most complicated character to play, but has the highest DPS potential if you can find the right gear, as I mentioned earlier. It's a big if, though. Like, if she can get some of the more devastating spells, she can just pump out damage safely at range into bosses, and in the right hands of somebody who knows how to use Magic Cocktail effectively and who can manage their FP effectively, she is just absolutely deadly. And another thing that people don't think about when playing Recluse is the fact that she only needs to damage an enemy to siphon out FP. So if she has a weapon that has a really good weapon skill, like maybe you're using Waves of Gold or something, and you hit a bunch of enemies and then you just siphon FP back and then use it again and then siphon FP back, she has the ability to reuse weapon skills like at will almost, as long as she can siphon more FP than the cost of the skill, or even if she can siphon close to it, it's going to take her a long time to run out of FP because she has a huge FP bar. So she can be really good at something like that. It's just difficult for her to get into melee range having lower HP than any other character. Her ultimate skill is very difficult to time because of its long cast duration, and then I find a lot of times players can't take advantage of it because they won't run into melee if they're at low health. Like, they're going to back up and heal up if they're at low health. They're not going to run in and risk getting down. So they won't play aggressively when they see this mark if they're at low health. They might have just healed instead. Potentially they could get themselves killed trying to heal themselves using this ability. In some ways, this ultimate is almost better for topping off between boss fights so that you can reliably heal and replenish FP from it. Like if you haven't hit a Site of Grace in a while and you see like 4, regular enemies or something like that, you could use it there and top up before going into a boss fight. But I think I would like to see this skill either last longer because you don't get tons of FP and HP from it, or replenish more HP and FP per hit so that players don't have to be as aggressively to top themselves up. I definitely feel like it needs a bit of a rework. I don't know if the cast duration needs to change, but I feel like you should get more reward from it than you currently do. And Magic Cocktail is an interesting one because a lot of times in boss fights or out on the landscape when you're facing bosses, you know, you're trying to replenish your FP when you can, particularly early on in a run when you don't have a huge FP pool. You're just trying to do your best to maintain your FP, and you're not worried about what element you're siphoning. In this circumstance, sometimes you pull like an effect combination that's not good at all for you. Like maybe you run in and do a slash, and that's not what you want to do. You're trying to stay out of melee range, but you have no choice to do it. Sometimes when you're playing, you don't even know what you're going to do because there's so many different combinations. It can be very, very difficult for this. I don't know if I feel like this needs less combinations or if it needs a little bit of a rework. I mean, it works pretty good. Like, I don't have huge complaints about it. It was fun to play. I love the fact that you have something to do besides cast spells as a caster. I don't want it eliminated or anything like that, but I do feel like maybe it needs some tweaking so it has a little bit more predictability, and I'm not sure exactly how to do that. And the last thing that I want to talk about is character progression in Elden Ring Nightreign and where I think it's at right now. A lot of times in roguelike games, you'll have like a strong character progression or some kind of character progression outside of games. I guess you would call these roguelite, whatever. Or you have some sort of character progression mid-run that can change the way you're playing mid-run. Like in Hades, you had hammers that changed the way a weapon played. You could play differently. It was kind of like your subclass, if you will. Other games, like Lost Eidolon's Veil of the Witch, it has subclasses you can choose from for heroes so that they play differently. And I think I wish Nightreign had something mid-run that could change the way that you play. Like when you hit level 6 or you hit level 9 or something, you could maybe go one route or another and have a different playstyle inside that class. For instance, like if you played Duchess, maybe you have an assassin playstyle, and maybe you have like a huntress playstyle that uses a ranged weapon. So maybe you could level 6 go assassin and increase your melee damage or crit damage or something, some effects or a skill. And then if you went Huntress, maybe you were more effective. You got like a range damage buff, so you could lean into the mobility of Duchess, but you still use a ranged weapon. And I know there's an archer class in the game, and that might be a bad example, but you get what I mean. I would love to see some sort of progression midway that could change the way a playthrough plays for you. Right now, the only thing that really changes the way you play is the weapon that you get. Admittedly, there are a lot of weapons and a lot of varieties to choose from, but I generally feel like on any given run, each character is kind of going for a specific style of play, and that's kind of the way that works best for them. For instance, on Wylder, he's typically trying to find like a great sword or a katana or something that's got bleed on it, does high damage per swing, but also sets some sort of status effect. Duchess is typically looking for like claws or a katana or something with bleed as a fast attacking weapon. Guardian is typically looking for like a better shield or maybe a better one-handed weapon that's kind of, strength focused. The Recluse is usually trying to find like a magic-focused one-handed weapon and then a good staff with some spells on it in the left hand, or maybe two staffs to pick from that have different spells. Those are kind of generally what you're going for when you're playing. It doesn't vary a lot from that usually. I would like to see something that kind of breaks that up a bit, or that changes the trajectory of a character and allows them to play a bit differently that character each run. Again, you can with different weapons, but it just feels like you're kind of punished for doing that. So what do you guys make of the classes having played them in the network test? What do you think the best strengths and weaknesses of each character are? Do you have a favorite? Let me know in the comments below.